Using drones from the air and armored bulldozers on the ground, Israel is launching its largest military incursion into the occupied West Bank city of Jenin in 2 decades. So Israel says the operation is focused on counter-terrorism. Palestinians call it a new war crime against our defenseless people. The Palestinian Health Ministry says at least 8 people have been killed, with that number likely to rise, and at least 50 others now injured. Israel says it hit terrorist infrastructure in the densely populated Jenin refugee camp. The operation comes less than 2 weeks after a raid in the same area erupted into a massive firefight, killing at least 5 Palestinians. We want to go straight to our Hadas Gold, who joins us now live near Jerusalem. Obviously, this is a notable escalation. Hadas, can you give us a sense of this operation, both on the ground but also in historical terms, given the uptick in violence that you've covered now for the last 18 months?
Yeah, we have been covering this regular sort of cycle of violence for the past 18 months, the Israeli military launching these regular raids into the occupied West Bank after a series of Palestinian attacks targeting Israelis. Now, the Israeli military saying that they're going into the West Bank to try to prevent militants from being able to later carry out attacks, but it just seems to be perpetuating the cycle of violence. And we have been reporting it seemingly time and time again about how everything we're seeing is once again reminiscent of the days of the Second Intifada, when Israeli tanks were seen in the actual cities themselves in the West Bank. But really today is something new, because it's been confirmed now from an Israeli military source telling CNN that this is the largest Israeli military operation in the West Bank since 2002. When you look at just the full number of soldiers, hundreds of Israeli soldiers, the fact that they were using airstrikes from drones, we know of at least 10 airstrikes that were being carried out in Jenin. When you look at the bulldozers that are tearing up streets on the streets of Jenin. Now, Israeli military saying this is being done to try and root out IEDs that militants place underneath the surface level of the street, but obviously that affects the civilians who are living there as well. And we are actually seeing Israeli tanks, not in Jenin itself, but on the outskirts outside the city limits. Again, these are not scenes that we are used to seeing here, at least not since the days of the Second Intifada. And Paula, this is ongoing as we speak. We are still getting reports of firefights. The Israeli military saying that they just in the last hour, 2 hours or so, were engaged in firefights with militants at a mosque. They say that they discovered some underground tunnels under the mosque that were being used to store weapons. We are getting reports of potentially even further airstrikes. This has now been going on for definitely more than 12 hours. I think we're approaching now 16 hours of this operation. And yet still, the Israeli military is saying that it is not necessarily a large-scale operation against the entire West Bank. They say they are focused on Jenin and that they want to essentially prevent Jenin from once again becoming what they call a safe haven for militants. Now, we are hearing that at least 8 Palestinians have been killed. There have been some reports that some of them at least are militants, but no militant group has claimed them yet as their own. We know of at least 50 who have been injured. One Israeli soldier has been injured as well. But of course, for the civilians there, I was actually just in Jenin yesterday on the ground talking to residents. They today are saying this is something they have never seen before, or at least have not seen in decades. Now, the White House has said that they are closely monitoring the situation. They did say broadly that they support Israel's security and its fight against terrorism. But there is a concern that this will spill over into something much broader, that this will spill over across the West Bank. We have already heard from the militant group Hamas. It has called on its members, on its cells, to strike Israel, it said, wherever it can. Paula.
Yeah, certainly. I'm glad, Hadas, that you could put that into historical perspective. As you said, more than 2 decades in terms of this escalation. We will continue to follow this developing story for us. Hadas Goldfuss, appreciate your update. Time now for The Exchange. Our next guest tweets that the Jenin refugee camp is about 1 square kilometer and home to about 13,000 people. I mean, think of that. It's incredibly crowded. And she says targeting this camp from the air and ground puts all residents at risk. Noor Day is a political analyst and a former spokesperson for the Palestinian Authority, and she joins me now live from Ramallah in the West Bank. I want to get right to what you know about the operation in the ground right now. What can you tell us about the operation itself, and what are you hearing from your sources on the ground?
Well, I can tell you that journalists have been struggling to cover the story on the ground. They've come under direct fire themselves. The medical crews, as you reported, have also had a lot of difficulty accessing the refugee camp and retrieving the injured or attending to those who need help, including the elderly and the civilians trapped in the refugee camp during this operation, which is going on almost 16 hours now. And a lot of former colleagues who have covered, who had covered the 2002 invasion of the refugee camp say the atmosphere is very reminiscent of that bloody episode when Israel killed over 60 Palestinians and basically pummeled the refugee camp, destroyed it, leveled many of its neighborhoods to the ground, also under the very similar pretenses.
You know, it's hard for us to get a read of what's going on the ground. We have live pictures right now of Jenin. As you can see, as the sun is setting, we still see smoke rising from there. The Israeli government believes that this operation will continue for some hours to come. In terms of tactics here, what are you hearing as well? Which I'm sure it's difficult for you to get information because, you know, mobile internet coverage is spotty, sometimes non-existent. We just had that update from the Palestinian Red Crescent saying medical professionals were having a hard time getting to those injured. I mean, give us an indication of operationally what this will look like if you're inside such a crowded camp right now.
Well, let me try to visualize this for the viewers. Basically, a large contingent of Israeli armored vehicles have gotten into the refugee camp. They've basically plowed many of the streets. They've destroyed the water network, cut off electricity. So the residents now have no electricity, no water, and nowhere to go. And many of the buildings have been taken over by Israeli soldiers to be used as sniper positions. So those who have had the misfortune of Israeli soldiers taking over their home are now trapped in those homes that is being used by Israeli soldiers to shoot at Palestinian activists. And I want to put this in perspective, if you allow me. For Palestinians, these horrible scenes and these SOS calls from paramedics and from journalists and from residents of the refugee camp are part of a bigger and very violent picture of daily life under Israeli occupation. The Palestinians are ruled against their will by the Israelis. And in order to maintain that rule, which is violent in its nature, Israel conducts these campaigns against Palestinian resistance, which exists because the occupation exists. As you know, your reporter was reporting out of Ukraine a few moments ago and was talking about efforts to combat occupation there. It's pretty much the same when it comes to Palestinians, only unfortunately the international reaction is very different.
And our reporting says that the United States Biden administration is watching the situation closely, but it continues to hold the line, saying that, look, Israel is entitled to safeguard its security. I also want to get to those calls from Hamas and Islamic Jihad to, in their words, strike Israel by all available means to stop the massacre. I mean, how much of a tipping point are we at here in terms of an escalation, especially, you know, all available means basically is a call to action for more violence, is it not?
Well, I want to, just bring in the Palestinian perspective here. Being ruled against your will by a foreign military is violent, and it's violent every day, even when it doesn't make the news. The fact that Hamas and Islamic Jihad are now calling for reaction against the invasion of the refugee camp is predictable. There's nothing surprising about that, just as there is nothing surprising about the fact that Palestinians don't want to be ruled by foreigners who use unnecessary force, who use extreme force against civilians. Israel has killed more Palestinians this year so far than it did the year before, which was already the most violent in the past 16 or 17 years. It has allowed for settlement expansion that has exceeded the total number of settlement units built last year, only in the past 6 months. This Israeli government, which Israelis are protesting against, is the most violent, most extreme, most anti-Palestinian that we've seen since Israel's establishment, perhaps. At its core and its declared agenda is not just to maintain control over the West Bank, to annex that West Bank and consider it part of of Israel, but also to crush the very notion of Palestinian freedom and statehood. So the Palestinians are not only under attack, they feel that their very existence is under attack.
So we will continue to follow the breaking news on this story. I want to update us that from 50, it's now gone to at least 80 wounded. That's the information we're getting. We thank you for your insights on this. As I say, we continue to follow the breaking news out of Israel. Appreciate it.